My daughter's voice didn't sound like my daughter anymore. It was a slurred, trembling whisper that cut through the frozen quiet of my bedroom at exactly 2 a.m., chilling the very blood in my veins. "Mom, please," Rachel gasped, her breath catching violently against the receiver. They won't let me." A muffled thud, a sharp, suffocating gasp, then the line went completely dead. When you are Eleanor Caldwell, a 68-year-old self-made woman who spent 40 years navigating the cutthroat diamond trade, you don't ask questions when an alarm sounds. You analyze the structural threat, and you act. I didn't waste a single second trying to call her back. I threw on my coat, grabbed the silver Beretta tucked safely inside my safe, and tore through the blinding Chicago snowstorm in my black Range Rover. Rachel is a dedicated pediatric nurse. She doesn't drink. She doesn't touch drugs. She is the most brilliant, level-headed soul I know. The sheer terror in her slurred words made absolutely no logical sense. 25 minutes later, my headlights swept across the imposing iron gates of the Sterling estate in North Shore. The mansion stood dark, a towering fortress of old money and cold secrets. I marched up to the massive double doors and hammered my fist against the solid oak. I didn't ring the bell. I knocked with the force of a mother, ready to rip the house down brick by brick. When the door finally swung open, Victoria Sterling stood there. Any normal mother-in-law awoken at 3 a.m. by frantic pounding would be in pajamas, looking disheveled and confused. Not Victoria. She was fully dressed in a tailored silk blouse, her silver hair perfectly coiffed, her face heavily made up. She hadn't been sleeping. She had been waiting. "Eleanor," Victoria murmured, her voice dripping with a cold, calculated arrogance that turned my stomach. What on earth is the meaning of this unrefined disturbance? "Where is my daughter?" I demanded, stepping forward. Victoria didn't flinch. She crossed her manicured arms, physically blocking the doorway, a defiant, nauseating smirk playing on her lips. "Rachel is having a severe mental episode, Eleanor. She is completely hysterical, shouting delusions about Julian's finances. My son gave her something to help her calm down, and she is finally resting. I suggest you take your Range Rover and go home. You are making a pathetic fool of yourself." The stench of her lie was suffocating. I didn't ask for her permission. I used the full weight of my shoulders to shove her aside. Victoria stumbled back against the grand foyer wall, gasping in feigned aristocratic outrage. "You cannot barge into my home!" she shrieked. "Watch me!" I growled. I took the grand staircase 2 steps at a time, ignoring her shrill protests echoing behind me. I reached the master suite on the 2nd floor. The door was locked tight. 40 years of independence had taught me how to break through barriers. I raised my heavy winter boot, kicked the expensive wood right below the handle, and the lock splintered with a violent crash. I rushed inside, and the breath vanished from my lungs. The room was a disaster zone. A crystal lamp lay shattered on the floor, and the heavy silk sheets were torn, dragged across the room. And there, lying completely unconscious on the cold marble floor of the bathroom, was my little girl. I dropped to my knees beside her. Her clothes were torn, her breathing shallow, barely a whisper of air escaping her lips. But what made my heart violently hammer against my ribs were her pale arms. Under the harsh fluorescent light, thick, dark, finger-shaped bruises wrapped around her skin. Someone had pinned her down with terrifying, brutal force. As an expert who spent a lifetime examining the flaws in precious stones under a loupe, I knew pressure trauma when I saw it. These were not the marks of a fall. These were the undeniable marks of a struggle. They had held her down. "Call 911 right now," I roared, my voice shaking the expensive framed artwork on the walls. Julian Sterling lunged into the room, panting heavily. His silk pajamas were immaculate, his hair perfectly styled. He wasn't out of breath from panic. He was panting from physical exertion. Guilt flashed in his eyes before he slapped on a mask of theatrical devastation. "Eleanor, please, calm down," Julian pleaded, raising his hands. "We do not need to involve emergency services. I've already called Dr. Kensington, our private family physician. He is discreet. He knows how to handle these delicate family situations without making a public spectacle." "She is barely breathing, you polished coward!" I snarled, closing the distance between us. "Call 911 or I swear to God I will dismantle you." "You don't understand, Eleanor," Julian hissed, his tone shifting into something ruthless and sharp. "If the authorities come, they will put her on an involuntary psychiatric hold. It will ruin her career. Step back and let us handle my wife." He made the fatal mistake of reaching out to grab my shoulder. I didn't argue. I grabbed the front of his expensive cashmere sweater, twisted the fabric into my fist, and shoved him violently backward. Julian stumbled over the shattered wood of the door, crashing hard into the hallway wall. I turned my back on him, carefully slid my arms beneath Rachel's knees and back, and lifted her. She was heartbreakingly light, completely limp in my embrace. I carried her down the grand staircase, out through the heavy doors, and laid her gently across the back seat of my Range Rover, wrapping my winter coat around her shivering body. Julian scrambled out after me, throwing himself into the passenger seat. "If you're taking her, I'm coming. I am her husband. I have the legal right." I didn't have time to drag him out. Every second mattered. I slammed the gas, tearing down the winding driveway into the freezing Chicago night. The drive to City General Hospital was a tense, suffocating blur. I broke every speed limit while Julian sat beside me in the dark, furiously typing messages on his phone. When I finally screeched to a halt in front of the emergency room, a team of nurses rushed forward with a gurney, wheeling Rachel inside. But before I could even explain the situation to the intake nurse, the heavy double doors of the hospital slid open. A tall man in a tailored trench coat stepped into the bright, sterile light, flanked by two large men in dark suits. My heart stopped. It was Mitchell. Arthur Mitchell, my late husband's financial attorney. The man who oversaw Rachel's multi-million-dollar trust fund. The man I had trusted implicitly for over 20 years to protect my family's legacy. "Mitchell?" I breathed, a sudden wave of confusion washing over me. "Thank God you're here. Julian and his mother, they did something to Rachel. Mitchell didn't look at me. His face was a mask of cold, unyielding stone. He bypassed me entirely, walking straight to Julian, and handed him a sleek, black leather folder heavily stamped with an official notary seal. "The paperwork is finalized, Julian," Mitchell said, his voice smooth, professional, and completely devoid of humanity. "The comprehensive medical proxy and emergency financial conservatorship are active as of 10 minutes ago. You have uncontested legal authority." I stared at him, the sterile hospital lights suddenly spinning around me. The betrayal felt like a jagged blade plunging straight between my shoulder blades. "Mitchell, what have you done? She is my daughter." Mitchell finally turned his eyes to me, looking at me as if I were nothing more than an obsolete piece of history. "I'm sorry, Eleanor," he said calmly, as the two dark-suited men stepped forward, forming a solid physical wall between my unconscious daughter and me. "But in the world of high finance, structures change. You are officially powerless now. You need to step back." Julian took a slow step toward me, the theatrical mask of the weeping husband vanishing completely, replaced by the smug, victorious grin of a predator. He leaned in close, his breath hot against my ear, and whispered the words that set my entire world on fire. The sterile fluorescent lights of the hospital ceiling didn't just illuminate the corridor, they exposed the raw, jagged fracture in my reality. For a fraction of a second, the roaring in my ears drowned out the steady mechanical hum of the emergency room. The freezing Chicago storm outside, battering the glass pane windows with a ruthless, icy vengeance, felt miles away compared to the absolute sub-zero temperature currently expanding inside my chest. "She is no longer your concern, Eleanor," Julian whispered, his lips curling into a soft, venomous smile that made the skin on my neck crawl. "In the eyes of the law, you are just an outsider looking into our family." Beside him, Mitchell adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses with the same cold, methodical precision he used when auditing a closing corporate ledger. This was the man who had sat at my dining table every Thanksgiving for 2 decades. The man who had held my late husband's hand as he took his final breath, swearing on his professional honor to protect our family's legacy. Now he stood in the shadow of Julian Sterling, holding a black leather folder containing the document that legally erased me as a mother. "You signed the proxy paperwork, Eleanor," Mitchell said, his voice flat, professional, and entirely devoid of remorse. "Rachel willingly signed it over to Julian on her 29th birthday." Under Section 4 of the Emergency Ex Parte Declaration, Julian holds absolute uncontested authority over both her medical care and her immediate financial assets. Any interference from you will be met with an immediate restraining order. Step back. I looked from Mitchell's dead eyes to Julian's polished, manicured hands. A sickening wave of recollection hit me, dragging me back 3 years into the past. I remembered the day Julian first walked into my showroom. He had presented himself as a sophisticated, soft-spoken wealth manager, eager to learn about the intricate, heavy physics of raw diamonds. I had taken pity on him. I saw a young man striving to build an identity outside his mother's suffocating, old money shadow. I had mentored him. I had introduced him to high-tier private investors who trusted my name implicitly. I had opened the vault of my network and handed him the keys, believing he was a man of structure and honor. I had practically handed him my daughter on a velvet cushion, and this was the interest on my investment. "Julian," I said, keeping my voice low, gravelly, and dangerously calm. My heart was pounding like a heavy piston against my ribs, but my hands, tucked loosely inside the pockets of my charcoal wool coat, were completely still. "You are playing an exceptionally dangerous game. Look at her arms. Look at those contusions. Those are restraint marks. She didn't overdose. You held her down." Julian let out a short, soft chuckle, a sound so entirely casual it was deeply unsettling. He stepped closer, entering my personal space, the faint scent of his expensive Tom Ford cologne mixing with the smell of hospital antiseptic. "You've always had a vivid imagination, Eleanor," Julian murmured, his tone dripping with a patronizing, sickening warmth. "Those marks are from when I had to violently tackle her away from the master bedroom window. She was hysterical, out of her mind. The clinical reality is that your daughter has been secretly abusing prescription opioids and heavy alcohol to cope with the immense stress of her clinic. You've been so blinded by your own arrogance, so obsessed with running your diamond empire, that you completely failed to notice your own daughter spiraling into absolute oblivion. You weren't there for her. I was." The sheer audacity of his gaslighting was a physical weight, a suffocating smoke designed to make me question my own sanity. He was trying to rewrite reality, to paint my brilliant, dedicated daughter as a tragic junkie and me as an oblivious, negligent mother. "She is severely allergic to the sulfites in the wine you claim she drank, Julian," I stated, my eyes locking onto his with the unyielding density of a diamond drill bit. "If she drank half a bottle of Merlot, her throat would have closed before she could even swallow those pills. She is a pediatric nurse. She knows pharmacology better than anyone in this building. Your narrative is built on cheap, fractured materials." Before Julian could respond, the heavy, rhythmic clicking of high heels announced the arrival of Victoria Sterling. She glided into the waiting area, her deep emerald silk robe perfectly pressed, her silver hair immaculate. She looked like a predator surveying a fresh kill. Behind her walked Dr. Kensington, the corrupt medical director of the Northwest Memorial Private Wing, along with 2 large hospital security guards. "That is quite enough, Eleanor," Victoria said, her voice sharp, venomous, and chillingly commanding. "We did not want to expose your family's unfortunate weakness to the public, but your erratic, unstable behavior is forcing our hand." Victoria stepped toward me, her manicured fingers elegantly unclasping her designer handbag. She pulled out a thick document and held it up for the hospital staff to see. "Your Honor, or rather, Dr. Kensington," Victoria corrected herself with a vicious, triumphant smirk. "We have just filed an emergency forensic lien against Caldwell Diamonds. Under the terms of the spousal financial consolidation agreement that Rachel signed when they married, Julian has the legal authority to leverage family collateral during a severe medical crisis. Because Rachel is mentally incapacitated, Julian has officially seized control of your primary corporate vault in the downtown Diamond District. The locks are being changed as we speak." My chest tightened. This wasn't just a medical hijacking. It was a total, coordinated annihilation. They hadn't just taken my daughter. They had just legally confiscated my life's work, the multi-million-dollar gemstone vault that was the foundation of the Caldwell Empire. They were cutting off my financial oxygen supply, ensuring I didn't have the capital to fight them in a prolonged legal battle. "You are bankrupt, aren't you, Victoria?" I asked softly, my voice completely devoid of any frantic emotion. I let my shoulders slump slightly, deliberately dropping my posture to look smaller, frailer, like a broken Goa foo who had just watched her world collapse. Victoria's eyes flashed with a sudden wild fury before she smoothed her expression back into a mask of polite disdain. "We are protecting our family legacy from your daughter's catastrophic instability, Eleanor. Julian's firm is perfectly stable. It is your daughter who is a liability. Dr. Kensington has already signed the rapid transport authorization. Rachel is being moved to Silver Oak Wellness Center tonight, a secure private facility where she will receive the intensive chemical restraint she clearly requires." Julian stepped forward, adjusting the lapels of his cashmere sweater, looking down at me with a sickeningly patronizing authority. "Go home, Eleanor. Rest your tired old mind. You are 68 years old, completely alone, and your company is currently under a legal freeze. You don't have the power, you don't have the money, and you don't have the legal standing to stop us. You are completely powerless." I stood there in the sterile hallway, the target of their coordinated cruelty. The security guards shifted their weight, their hands resting near their batons, waiting for me to cause a scene. Julian and Victoria were practically begging for me to explode, to throw a punch or scream, so they could have me arrested for assault, validating their narrative that the Caldwell family was inherently violent and unstable. I took a deep, shuddering breath. I forced my clenched hands to relax inside my coat pockets. I had to build a temporary bridge. I had to play the role they wanted me to play. "You're right," I whispered, making my voice tremble just enough to sound thoroughly crushed. I let my chin fall toward my chest, staring at the polished linoleum floor. "You have the proxy. You have the vault. I am just a frightened mother who panicked. I don't understand these complex financial agreements or psychiatric procedures. I just saw my little girl on the floor and I completely lost my mind." Julian relaxed instantly, his rigid defensive posture replaced by a triumphant, arrogant stance. He patted my shoulder, his touch feeling like absolute ice against my coat. "I'm glad you're finally being reasonable, Eleanor," Julian said, his tone dripping with false warmth. "It's a very complex situation. It requires a delicate, sophisticated touch, something a retired widow simply cannot provide. Go back to your empty house. Leave the heavy lifting to us." At that exact moment, 2 burly private transport medics wheeled Rachel out of the trauma room. She was completely strapped down to the gurney, heavy leather restraints crisscrossing over her chest and legs. An oxygen mask covered her pale face, her beautiful eyes rolled back, lost to the heavy sedatives pumping through her veins. Julian and Victoria walked purposefully alongside the gurney, whispering instructions to the medics, completely thought-low me as they escorted my unconscious daughter out into the freezing night. I watched through the glass doors as they loaded her into a sleek, unmarked black transport van. The doors slammed shut, the engine roared, and the vehicle vanished into the dark storm, taking my child to a private black site. I stood alone in the quiet hospital lobby, looking like a defeated, broken old woman. The victory they felt must have been intoxicating. They thought they had successfully outsmarted the great Eleanor Caldwell. They thought they had broken my spirit and stripped me of my empire. But they had made a monumental, fatal miscalculation. They forgot that a master jeweler spent her entire life studying the hidden fractures within the most precious structures. They thought they had locked me out of my vault, but they didn't know about the secondary ledger. They didn't know about the secret I had been protecting since the day Rachel married Julian. I reached deep into the inner lining of my coat, my fingers brushing against the cold, heavy steel of my burner phone. The Nen Kam Suk inside me didn't break. It transformed into a cold, methodical, and terrifying clarity. They wanted a war in the shadows. They were about to find out exactly what happens when you try to crush a mother who knows exactly how to grind a rock into dust. I pulled out the phone, dialed a secure international number, and waited for the gruff voice on the other side to answer. "Leon?" I said, my voice completely flat, devoid of fear, and harder than poured concrete. "The foundation has collapsed. Assemble the crew. It's time to systematically demolish the House of Sterling." The next morning, the sun rose over Chicago not with warmth, but with the cold, unforgiving glare of a fluorescent bulb reflecting off cracked ice. I sat in a secluded vinyl booth at the back of the Drake Hotel's Palm Court, a place where old money came to whisper their treasons over porcelain teacups. The air smelled faintly of lavender and stale wealth, My charcoal suit was still pristine, but I deliberately let my shoulders curve slightly forward. I left my hair a fraction less styled than usual. I placed my hands on the white linen tablecloth, letting them tremble just enough to catch the light. I was no longer Eleanor Caldwell, the iron-willed matriarch of the Diamond District. To anyone watching, I was a defeated, grieving Goa Fu, drowning in the sudden catastrophic collapse of her family. The heavy scent of Tom Ford cologne preceded him before he even sat down. Julian Sterling slid into the booth across from me, radiating a quiet, intoxicating arrogance. He didn't wear pajamas or sweaters today. He was dressed in a bespoke, triple-piece navy brioni suit. His silk tie nodded with mathematical precision. He looked like a man who had just conquered a kingdom, completely oblivious to the fact that he was standing on a fault line. "You look tired, Eleanor," Julian began, his voice smooth, dripping with a highly practiced, patronizing sympathy. He signaled the waiter for an espresso without asking what I wanted. "Though I suppose that's to be expected. Watching your only child completely ruin her life with drugs and paranoid delusions. It takes a heavy toll on a woman of your advanced age." I kept my eyes fixed on my untouched coffee, remaining completely silent. The nen kamzuk inside my chest tightened by another millimeter, but outwardly, I gave him nothing but a frail, compliant nod. "I asked you here to talk about the corporate vault, Julian," I said, making my voice sound raspy, thin, and hollow. "The locks have been changed. My managers were turned away by private security this morning. That vault contains 40 years of my life's work. It contains raw stones that belonged to my late husband." Julian leaned back against the plush velvet booth, a slow, triumphant smirk spreading across his face. He elegantly crossed one leg over the other. "Let's be entirely transparent here, Eleanor, since we are family," Julian murmured, lowering his voice into a chillingly calm, gaslighting whisper. "Caldwell Diamonds doesn't belong to you right now. It belongs to the estate. And as Rachel's legal proxy and financial conservator-elect, I am simply restructuring the assets. Your company's capital was dangerously mismanaged. You were so blinded by your own vanity, so obsessed with your little gemstones, that you completely ignored the massive deficit your daughter was racking up at her clinic. Rachel was stealing from us, Eleanor. She was funneling money to cover her secret addiction. I am changing the locks to save what is left of your dignity." The sheer, staggering troutro of his words was a physical assault. He was accusing my daughter, the most selfless pediatric nurse in the city, of theft, while he sat on a throne built from a $12 million Ponzi scheme. He wanted me to scream. He wanted me to break my elegant composure and call him a liar so he could use it against me in court tomorrow. I didn't break. I didn't blink. I simply took a slow breath and let the insult wash over me, absorbing the hit like carbon under tectonic pressure. "I see," I whispered, keeping my hands trembling on the table. "You believe you are protecting her." "I am saving her," Julian corrected sharply, his eyes flashing with a manic, controlling energy. "And I am saving you from yourself. You are 68, Eleanor. Your husband is dead. Your daughter is a chemical vegetable locked in a secure facility where she belongs. You don't have a corporate infrastructure anymore. You are an obsolete relic in a modern financial market. If you try to fight the emergency ex parte hearing tomorrow morning, my attorneys will drag your names through every major media outlet in Illinois. We will expose Rachel's fake suicide attempt. We will expose your negligence as a mother. I will make sure the name Caldwell becomes completely synonymous with tragic, upper-class ruin. Do you understand me? I looked into his eyes, recording the exact frequency of his arrogance. "I understand," I murmured, lowering my chin in submission. I am too tired to fight a prolonged litigation, Julian. I just want to see my daughter. Please, let me visit her at Silver Oak." Julian laughed, a short, ugly, dismissive sound that made my teeth ache behind my closed lips. "That won't be happening, Eleanor. Dr. Kensington has placed her on a strict 72-hour isolation protocol. No visitors, especially not from the mother whose heavy-handed expectations drove her to a chemical breakdown in the first place. Go back to your empty mansion. Pack your bags. Go to your little cabin in Tahoe and cry by the water. Leave the adults to handle the heavy lifting." He reached into his breast pocket, pulled out a stack of non-disclosure documents, and slid them across the linen tablecloth, tapping his gold Montblanc pen against the paper. "Sign these waivers, Eleanor. Agree to drop any legal standing for tomorrow's hearing, and I might allow you to see her for 10 minutes next month. Refuse, and I will dismantle whatever pieces of your life you have left." I stared at the paperwork. This was the moment I was supposed to sign away my daughter's life to buy myself time for the counterattack. I reached out, my fingers wrapping around the gold pen, preparing to execute the temporary surrender that would keep Julian blind until Friday morning. Suddenly, the heavy burner phone in my coat pocket vibrated violently. It was a sharp, repetitive pattern. Not a text message, an emergency distress signal. My heart hammered against my ribs with a sudden, suffocating panic. I didn't answer it in front of Julian. I stood up slowly, letting the pen drop back onto the table. "I need to use the restroom, Julian," I mumbled, playing the role of the overwhelmed, broken old woman to perfection. "My nerves. I need a moment," Julian scoffed, waving his hand dismissively as he reached for his espresso. "Take your time, Eleanor. The reality of your absolute powerlessness isn't going to change while you're in the powder room." I walked with slow, fragile steps out of the palm court, turning into the secluded, marble-paneled hallway near the hotel's executive offices. The moment I was out of his line of sight, the frail old woman vanished. My posture snapped straight. My jaw locked like stone. I pulled the encrypted burner phone from my jacket and hit the receiver. "Leon," I said, my voice cutting through the quiet hallway like a scalpel. "Report." There was no answer from Leon. Instead, a voice filled the speaker that sent a bolt of cold, paralyzing dread straight down my spine. It was a chaotic, echoing environment. The distant wail of sirens, the crackle of two-way radios, and the heavy, ragged breathing of a man in immense pain. "Eleanor!" a voice gasped. It wasn't Leon. It was Mitchell. My late husband's financial attorney, the man who was supposed to be drafting our counter-petition and secure the asset freeze, was choking on his own breath. "Mitchell? What's happening? Where is Leon?" I demanded, my knuckles turning white around the plastic casing of the phone. We were set up, Eleanor," Mitchell wheezed, a sharp gasp of agony escaping his lips. "Leon and I, we were leaving the forensic lab with the uncompromised blood vials, the proof that Rachel was Dowduck Bang Rohypnol, a black SUV. It came out of nowhere in the industrial district. It rammed Leon's car at 70 miles an hour. It was a T-bone collision, Eleanor, a deliberate hit. The air vanished from my lungs. The entire floor beneath my designer shoes felt like it was tilting into an abyss. Are you alive, Mitchell? Where is the evidence? I'm trapped in the passenger seat. My legs are crushed." Mitchell wept, his polished, sophisticated composure completely shattered by raw terror. "The medics are trying to cut me out right now. But the cooler, Eleanor, the men from the SUV, they broke the windows before the police arrived. They took the independent toxicology reports. They took the blood vials. They took Leon's laptop with the cloned hard drive data. Everything is gone. Every single piece of physical evidence we gathered, it's gone." "Leon?" My voice dropped into a deadly, freezing whisper. He's unconscious, Eleanor. There's so much blood. They're rushing him into the intensive care unit at Cook County Memorial right now. He's not breathing on his own. Victoria didn't just hire lawyers. She hired cleanup crews. They knew where we were. They knew what we had." A paramedic's voice barked in the background of the call, shouting for Mitchell to drop the phone as they loaded him onto a stretcher. The line went completely dead, leaving nothing but a hollow, mocking static buzzing against my ear. I stood frozen in the pristine, opulent hallway of the Drake Hotel. The trap had backfired. The foundation of my perfect counterattack hadn't just fractured. It had been completely pulverized by a single brutal act of violence. The uncompromised blood vials were destroyed. The forensic laboratory documentation was gone. The cloned financial ledgers showing Julian's $12 million Ponzi scheme were back in the hands of the enemy. And the two men who had risked their lives to help me save my daughter were currently bleeding out in an emergency trauma ward. Tomorrow morning at 9 a.m., the closed-door judicial hearing would proceed. Julian would walk into that courtroom with his completely falsified medical records, his corrupt doctor, and his ironclad spousal proxy. And I had absolutely nothing left. No evidence, no lawyers, no Tom Tutu, no financial leverage to stop him from declaring my daughter a permanent mental incompetent and draining her $8 million inheritance. The silence that rushed back into my mind was heavy, suffocating, and terrifyingly absolute. For the first time in 40 years, the dark, crushing weight of total defeat pressed against my chest. I looked down at my hands. They were no longer trembling for the performance. They were shaking from the sheer, breathtaking horror of reality. I was 68 years old. My assets were frozen. My allies were broken, and my little girl was trapped in a chemical prison, with the executioner's blade hovering directly over her head. I pulled a deep, ragged breath into my lungs, my jaw tightening until the bones ached. I tucked the dead phone back into my coat pocket, wiped the cold sweat from my forehead, and turned back toward the Palm Court. I had to walk back into that booth. I had to face the monster who had just crushed my entire world, and I had to make sure he didn't see the blood on my hands before I figured out how to survive the night. When I walked back into the Palm Court, my designer heels dragged slightly against the polished marble, creating a heavy, hollow cadence. Julian didn't look up immediately. He was busy brushing a microscopic speck of dust from his Brioni sleeve, his expression bathed in the calm, unadulterated serenity of a man who believed he had just successfully suffocated a dynasty. "You were gone a long time, Eleanor," Julian murmured, sliding his gold Mont Blanc pen precisely across the white linen cloth toward me. He didn't offer a smile. He offered a transaction. "I was beginning to think you had fled to the airport. Sign the waivers. Let's conclude this tragic chapter with whatever dignity you have left." I didn't sit straight. I let my spine curve. I reached out with a hand that shook with a raw, terrifying authenticity, not from weakness, but from the freezing adrenaline racing beneath my skin. I picked up the pen. My eyes, normally sharp enough to catalog the microscopic inclusions of a rough diamond, dulled into a performance of utter vacancy. "The corporate vault," I rasped, my voice cracking precisely on the syllables. "If I sign, you will ensure Dr. Kensington allows me to bring Rachel her favorite silk blanket, the one from her grandmother?" Julian let out a slow, deeply satisfied breath, a sickeningly patronizing smile spreading across his flawless face. He leaned forward, his eyes locking onto mine with the aggressive, venomous heat of a predator who had just watched his prey collapse into the mud. "Of course, Eleanor," Julian cooed, his words dripping with a thick, artificial warmth that made the bile rise in my throat. "We aren't monsters. We are simply doing what a shattered family must do. You've run your business into a wall, and your daughter has run her sanity into a syringe. It's time to surrender the burden to someone who can actually carry it. Sign the papers, go back to your empty house, and let the adults handle the wreckage." I lowered my eyes, pressing the gold nib against the parchment. I signed my name. Each stroke was slow, heavy, and deliberate. A formal execution of my absolute submission. Julian snatched the documents the exact millisecond the ink dried. He didn't even look at me as he tucked them away into his leather briefcase, snapping the brass latches shut with a sharp, definitive click. He stood up, adjusted his silk tie, and looked down at me with an expression of profound, heavily manufactured pity. "Rest your tired old mind, Eleanor," he murmured, before turning on his heel and sauntering out of the Palm Court, his posture radiant with the intoxicating high of total victory. I sat alone in the booth for exactly 3 minutes, staring at the empty white cloth. The frail widow completely evaporated. My spine snapped straight, and my eyes crystallized into a cold, terrifying clarity. Julian believed he had won because he had pulverized my frontline defenses. He thought the destruction of Mitchell's car and the theft of Leon's laptop had stripped me of my armor. But in his desperate, violent haste to clean up the evidence, the arrogant amateur had left a glaring, structural fault line right in the middle of his debris. The black SUV. Mitchell had said the men from the black SUV broke the windows and stole the laptop and the blood vials before the police arrived. For an elite corporate cleaner to execute a T-bone collision at 70 miles an hour and harvest physical evidence in the middle of a busy industrial district required extreme, military-grade synchronization. but Julian didn't have the operational infrastructure or the cash liquidity to command a private security hit team on 3 hours' notice. His firm was entirely overdrawn. He was bleeding capital to federal auditors. Julian hadn't ordered the hit, Victoria had. And if Victoria Sterling ordered a black SUV from her private black site facility at Silver Oak to execute a targeted extraction on the edge of the city, she had to authorize the vehicle's deployment through her corporate transport logs. The electronic logs of Silver Oak weren't tied to Julian's frozen corporate servers downtown. They were hardwired into the municipal zoning grid of the private clinic itself, a grid I had personally reviewed just 2 hours ago at the county records office. The enemy thought they had blinded me by stealing Leon's laptop. They didn't realize they had just forced me to stop playing by the rules of engagement. I left the Drake Hotel through the side entrance, stepping into the biting, freezing wind. I pulled out my secondary encrypted burner phone and dialed a 10-digit number that bypassed the domestic network entirely, routing directly through a secure server in Zurich. "Aisha," I said, my voice as flat and unyielding as poured concrete. "The asset freeze is compromised. The frontline team is out. Kichwat Mutdun, Duan Obsidian. Activate project name Obsidian. Phase 2. Aisha was the premier digital forensic architect for international luxury asset management in London, the woman who had designed the impenetrable offshore security vaults for my raw diamond shipments for 15 years. She didn't ask questions. She didn't offer generic validation. "The Sterling Network is a house of cards, Eleanor." Aisha's voice crackled through the secure line, sharp, rhythmic, and perfectly calm. "What do you need?" "I need a complete digital bypass of the Silver Oak facility's subterranean transport manifest," I stated, getting into my Range Rover and slamming the door against the storm. "Victoria used a private corporate vehicle to extract my evidence this morning. That means the vehicle's internal GPS data, its biometric dispatch signature, and the digital dashcam footage are cached on the clinic's local server right now. I need that data harvested before Friday morning." "The Silver Oak firewall is heavily fortified, Eleanor. It's a closed-circuit intranet. To extract the raw data logs, I need a physical terminal link inside the facility's utility grid. I can't do it from London." "I will provide the physical link," I replied, my jaw tightening until the bone ached. "You just ensure your decryption algorithms are ready by midnight. We are going to let them build their perfect legal fortress in front of the judge tomorrow. We are going to let them think I am entirely destroyed. Consider it done, Eleanor. Watch your perimeter." I ended the call and drove straight to Cook County Memorial Hospital. I didn't use the main entrance. I slipped through the loading docks, avoiding the security cameras with the practiced ease of a woman who knew exactly where the blind spots were calculated. I found Mitchell's room on the 3rd floor of the orthopedic ward. He lay beneath the harsh fluorescent lights, his legs encased in heavy plaster casts, his face a mosaic of violent lacerations and deep purple bruising. He looked up as I stepped into the room, his dry lips trembling with a mixture of raw terror and profound guilt. "Eleanor," Mitchell whispered, his voice cracking with emotion. "I'm so sorry. The paperwork, the counter-petition, the toxicology files, they took everything. We have nothing for the judge tomorrow. Julian's legal team will dismantle us in 5 minutes." I walked to the edge of his bed, reached out and placed my hand firmly over his trembling fingers. My gaze was a mask of impenetrable stone, but my voice carried a deep, soothing resonance that instantly anchored the panic in the room. "Listen to me very carefully, Mitchell," I murmured, leaning in close so the hospital monitors wouldn't pick up my frequency. "You did your job. The loss of that laptop was the exact catalyst I needed. Julian and Victoria believe they have completely neutralized us. They think I am sitting in my empty mansion, weeping over signed waivers. Their guards are relaxed. Their lawyers are celebrating. They have completely lowered their shields." Mitchell stared at me, his eyes widening through his swelling eyelids. "What are you going to do, Eleanor? You don't have a legal brief." "I don't need a legal brief to demolish a rotten foundation, Mitchell," I said, a slow, cold smile playing at the corners of my lips. "I am going to let them present their completely falsified medical records. I am going to let them tell their tragic, heartbreaking stories to Judge Aris tomorrow morning. I am going to let them lock the doors of that judicial chamber from the inside, believing they are executing a checkmate." I squeezed his hand one last time, my posture straight, my presence radiating the terrifying, absolute authority of a master project manager, preparing for a controlled demolition. And right when they think they have successfully erased my daughter's existence, I am going to detonate the entire House of Sterling right over their heads. Rest now, Mitchell. The heavy lifting is mine. I turned on my heel and walked out of the room, leaving the sterile hospital behind. The storm outside was intensifying, covering the city in a thick, blinding white shroud. But inside my mind, the darkness had completely cleared. The Nen Kamshuk was over. The springs were fully loaded, coiled down to the absolute limit of human endurance. Friday morning was coming, and I was going to ensure that the truth didn't just set my daughter free. It was going to systematically grind her executioners into absolute dust. The day of reckoning arrived not with a whimper, but with the heavy, unyielding strike of a gavel. Friday morning, 9 a.m. Room 602 of the Cook County Courthouse was a vacuum of suffocating silence. Outside, the freezing Chicago winds still battered the stone facade of the building. But inside the private, closed-door judicial chambers, the air was thick with the scent of a meticulously manufactured tragedy. Julian and Victoria Sterling sat at the plaintiff's table, looking like saints carved from ice. They were dressed in impeccable, conservative, dark charcoal attire. Julian's head was bowed, his shoulders artfully slumped as he dabbed a pristine white handkerchief at his eyes. Victoria sat beside him, her spine rigidly regal, her manicured hand resting gently on his shoulder to project the image of a stoic, grieving matriarch supporting her broken son. "Your Honor," Julian's began, his voice cracking with a flawless, rehearsed tremor as he addressed Judge Thomas Arris. "It tears my soul apart to stand here. I loved Rachel through her darkest moments, but the drug addiction has completely erased the woman I married. The forensic toxicological reports from the emergency room don't lie. She is a danger to herself. She needs the restricted clinical chemical restraint that only Silver Oak can provide. And she needs her financial assets protected from her own self-destruction." Judge Arris peered over his reading glasses, reviewing the thick binder of falsified medical records, signed waivers, and the paid-off affidavit from Dr. Kensington. The judge sighed heavily, picking up his heavy black fountain pen. "The documentation is exceptionally thorough, Mr. Sterling. The court recognizes the immediate necessity of this emergency ex parte conservatorship. Rachel Caldwell's autonomy is hereby—" "I suggest you keep that pen uncapped, Your Honor." A voice cut through the air like a sheet of fracturing ice. The heavy oak doors of the chamber swung open with a violent, resounding thud. I stepped across the threshold. I wasn't wearing the slumped posture of a defeated widow. My spine was straight, my jaw carved from granite, dressed in a sharp, tailored black suit that radiated absolute power. Behind me marched Aisha, clutching an encrypted military-grade laptop, flanked by 4 broad-shouldered federal agents wearing the gold shields of the FBI's Elite Financial Crimes Division. Leading them was Supervisory Special Agent Vance, his face deadpan and dangerous. Victoria shot to her feet, her chair scraping harshly against the marble floor. Her aristocratic mask violently fractured, revealing the snarling predator beneath. "Your Honor, this is an outrage. Have this mentally unstable woman removed. She signed the non-disclosure waivers yesterday. She has absolutely no legal standing in this room. She is completely powerless." I didn't yell. I didn't break my steady, rhythmic stride. I walked directly to the center of the courtroom, my leather heels striking the floor with the cadence of a firing squad. I stopped precisely 3 feet from Julian, looking down at his instantly sweating face. "Powerless, Victoria?" I murmured, my voice low, gravelly, and carrying a terrifying density. "You use that word far too easily." I turned my gaze to the bench. "Your Honor, my name is Eleanor Caldwell. I am not here to disrupt. I am here to execute a controlled demolition of a $12 million federal wire fraud, an attempted corporate hijacking, and a premeditated attempted murder." "What is the meaning of this?" Judge Arris roared, slamming his gavel. "Mr. Caldwell, this is a closed hearing. Who are these people?" Agent Vance stepped forward, flashing his federal credentials. "FBI, Your Honor. We are here to serve emergency federal arrest warrants based on an active racketeering and corporate embezzlement investigation." Julian's face went entirely translucent. The handkerchief dropped from his hand. He stopped breathing, his knuckles turning white as he gripped the edge of the table. "Your Honor," Aisha stated with sharp digital precision as she connected her laptop directly to the courtroom's central display monitors. Yesterday morning, a deliberate T-bone collision was executed against Eleanor Caldwell's Legal and Thom 22 team. A black SUV registered to Silver Oak Wellness Center rammed their vehicle and extracted a laptop containing cloned financial ledgers and raw blood vials. Victoria let out a harsh, shrill laugh. They have no proof of such ridiculous claims. Whatever fantasy they are spinning, they have zero physical evidence. I looked directly into Victoria's venomous eyes, a slow, cold smile cutting across my face. "You always panic far too easily, Victoria," I said, repeating the exact words she had whispered to her son the night before. "You always have." I turned back to the judge. "Your Honor, when you operate in the diamond trade for 40 years, you learn that the most dangerous traps are the ones wrapped in velvet. The laptop stolen from my team yesterday wasn't our primary data drive. It was bait. It was an unencrypted, traceable honeypot embedded with an active military-grade GPS beacon and an automatic network mirroring script. When Victoria's cleanup crew took that laptop back to the secure local server at Silver Oak to delete the evidence, they didn't erase our data. They opened a hardwired bidirectional digital bypass that allowed my forensic architect to harvest every cached file, every internal communication, and every corporate log inside the Sterling network." Aisha pressed a single key. The massive monitors on the courtroom walls flickered, crystallizing into blinding high-definition clarity. It wasn't just a financial ledger. It was a dual video and audio feed broadcasting from the micro cameras I had planted in Julian's home office. The room fell into a dead, suffocating silence as Victoria's own recorded voice boomed through the judicial chamber speakers, stripped of all aristocratic elegance. "She fought like a stray dog," Victoria's recorded voice sneered, the venom making Judge Eris's eyes widen in absolute horror. "It was pathetic. When I grabbed her by the arms and pinned her down against the hardwood floor, she was thrashing and screaming for you to stop. I dug my fingers into her arms until she couldn't move a single muscle. You have to be firm with feral things, Julian. You have to break their spirit before you can leash them." I held her perfectly still while you forced the glass against her mouth and poured that mixture down her throat. Julian collapsed heavily back into his chair, his breath coming in ragged, pathetic wheezes. The walls of his legal fortress hadn't just fractured. They were being ground into dust right above his head. The audio continued to play, capturing Julian's arrogant chuckle. "The paperwork is ready. Once the judge signs it on Friday, we pull the plug on her trust, and the clinic keeps her a vegetable for the next 10 years. No one will ever believe a junkie." Aisha pressed another key, flashing the authentic, independent forensic toxicology report pulled from the Silver Oak local server log. "The raw chemical saturating Rachel Caldwell's bloodstream isn't Xanax, Your Honor. It is flunitrazepam, Rohypnol, a controlled clinical weapon used by Victoria Sterling's private facility to induce artificial catatonia. Furthermore, the internal bank logs on this screen show that Julian Sterling's hedge fund is entirely bankrupt, facing a $12 million SEC deficit. They didn't want to cure my daughter. They poisoned her to bypass her physical signature and seize her $10 million matured trust fund to evade a federal prison cell. Judge Eris sat perfectly frozen, his face flushed with a terrifying judicial fury. In 30 years on the bench, he had never witnessed such naked, breathtaking malice. He looked down at Julian and Victoria, his eyes cutting through them like an industrial saw. "The emergency spousal proxy is hereby revoked," Judge Eris roared, his voice shaking the drywall of the chamber. "Full, absolute emergency guardianship is granted exclusively to Eleanor Caldwell. Release her daughter immediately." Before the echo of the gavel could even fade, Agent Vance stepped forward, pulling the heavy, polished silver handcuffs from his belt. "Julian Sterling," Vance barked, slamming the Gachong's arms behind his back with a sharp, metallic finality. "You are under arrest for federal wire fraud, grand embezzlement, criminal conspiracy, and the attempted murder of Rachel Caldwell. You have the right to remain silent." Julian's knees completely buckled. His expensive Italian leather shoes skidded against the marble floor as he collapsed to his knees, hyperventilating, tears spilling over his pale, sweating cheeks. The arrogant, untouchable financial predator was gone. In his place was a broken, weeping coward. "Wait! Please, wait!" Julian shrieked, spit flying from his lips as he twisted frantically in the cuffs, looking up at the judge. "I didn't want to do it. The physical violence, the drugs, locking her away, none of that was my idea. I was just trying to cover the market losses. The money was supposed to be a temporary loan. It was her. She orchestrated the entire thing." Julian pointed his cuffed hands awkwardly, violently throwing his own mother under the bus. "She found the clinic. She paid off Dr. Kensington. She crushed the pills and forced me to pour the wine. She pinned Rachel to the floor. You heard the recording? She did it. I am the victim here. She manipulated me." The courtroom erupted into total, unadulterated chaos. Victoria Sterling, the matriarch of North Shore royalty, completely snapped. Her refined, expensive facade violently shattered into a million irreparable pieces. "You pathetic, worthless little worm!" Victoria shrieked, a guttural primal sound that didn't even sound human. She lunged across the plaintiff's table with terrifying speed. Before the federal agents could react, Victoria swung her right arm back and struck Julian across the face with a vicious, open-handed slap. The crack of flesh against flesh echoed through the room like a gunshot. Julian cried out, a bright red mark instantly blossoming on his sweating cheek. "You blame me?" Victoria screamed, her eyes wild with a furious, psychotic madness, her silver hair tearing free from its perfect coiffure. "I spent my entire life cleaning up your miserable, incompetent messes. I built this family. I protected our legacy while you gambled it away like an absolute fool. I did what had to be done to save us from your stupidity." The heavy-set court bailiff lunged forward, wrapping his thick arms around Victoria's waist, tackling her hard against the mahogany table. Victoria thrashed, kicked her luxury heels against the furniture, and screamed obscenities that stripped away every last ounce of her elite dignity. "Victoria Sterling," the bailiff announced, pinning her arms behind her back and clicking a second pair of steel handcuffs into place. "You are under arrest for false imprisonment, aggravated assault, and attempted murder. Stop resisting." They were hauled up from the floor, their hands locked in cold, unforgiving federal steel. As they were forcibly marched down the central aisle of the courtroom by the FBI agents, the toxic, parasitic nature of their relationship was laid completely bare for the public record. "You are a failure, Julian!" Victoria roared. Her designer silk dress rumpled and twisted as she thrashed against the agent's grip. "A complete, miserable failure. You ruined our family name. You ruined my life. I hope you rot in a federal cell." "You forced me into this!" Julian screamed back, sobbing uncontrollably, his face smeared with tears and sweat. "You controlled every single aspect of my life. You made me do this. You are a monster. You ruined me." Their venomous, hateful screams echoed down the long marble corridors of the Cook County Courthouse until the heavy oak doors finally swung shut, abruptly cutting off their frantic wailing. The absolute ruin of the House of Sterling was complete. They had walked into this building as wealthy, untouchable elites, confident in their ability to manipulate the law and destroy my child. They were leaving in disgrace, their wealth exposed as a criminal fraud, their freedom entirely forfeit to a minimum of 30 years in a federal penitentiary. I stood perfectly still by the wooden railing, watching the doors settle back into their frames. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. True power doesn't roar. It observes, it calculates, and it strikes when the foundation of a lie is fully exposed. I turned away from the wreckage of their empire, looking directly into Agent Vance's eyes. "Let's go bring my daughter home," I said. The heavy oak doors of room 602 settled back into their frames with a soft, definitive click, sealing the toxic screams of the Sterling family inside the corridor of history. In an instant, the suffocating courtroom theater vanished, leaving behind an absolute, pristine quiet. The storm that had raged inside my chest for 72 hours finally broke, its freezing winds giving way to a sudden, profound stillness. I turned away from the legal tables, my tailored black suit no longer acting as armor for a siege, but simply as the clothes of a mother who had finished her work. I looked at Agent Vance, nodding once in silent gratitude. "Let's go get your daughter, Eleanor," Vance said softly, his voice stripped of its federal authority, replaced by a deep human respect. The drive to the Silver Oak Wellness Center was a blur of bare trees and clearing skies. Leon's private tactical vehicle ate the miles of the winding interstate, flanked by a quiet convoy of unmarked FBI SUVs. There were no flashing emergency lights, no screaming sirens, just the steady, rhythmic hum of tires against asphalt, moving with the surgical precision of a rescue mission. When we breached the towering iron gates of the 40-acre woodland estate, the facility looked completely different under the pale afternoon sun. It was no longer an unassailable fortress of old money secrets. It was an exposed foundation, its rotting core laid bare by a federal warrant. We didn't wait for the administration to clear the security checkpoints. Agent Vance's team moved through the pristine, marble-tiled lobby with overwhelming efficiency, detaining the private security guards and securing the facility's executive offices. Dr. Kensington emerged from a side corridor, his face a slick, terrified mask of sweat as two federal agents pinned him against his own mahogany reception desk, the silver handcuffs clicking tight around his wrists. Mitchell walked closely behind me, presenting the emergency guardianship order signed by Judge Aris to the head nurse, demanding the master biometric keycards for the high-security isolation wing. My heart hammered a frantic, desperate rhythm against my ribs as I snatched the card, bypassed the bureaucratic chatter, and marched straight down the long, sterile hallway of the 4th floor. I read the polished brass numbers as I walked, my jaw clenched, until I reached room 412. I swiped the confiscated keycard. The magnetic lock groaned, and the heavy door swung outward. The room was bathed in a dim, artificial twilight, smelling intensely of antiseptic and industrial linen. I stepped across the threshold, and the breath caught painfully in my throat. There, lying completely motionless on a narrow hospital bed beneath the harsh fluorescent lights, was my little girl. Rachel looked heartbreakingly small, her pale skin translucent against the stark white sheets. The intravenous lines ran from her delicate hand to a silent, blinking monitor, slowly tapering off the chemical restraints that had kept her mind buried in a forced fog. The deep purple bruises Julian and Victoria had left on her arms were fully visible, Han so into her pale skin like a brand of human cruelty. I walked to the edge of the mattress and fell to my knees, my tailored suit gathering dust on the cold floor. I reached out with trembling fingers, gently brushing a stray lock of dark hair away from her damp forehead. "Rachel," I whispered, my voice breaking under the weight of 1,000 unshed tears. "Sweetheart, it's Mom. I'm right here." Her eyelids fluttered, heavy and exhausted, fighting against the residual gravity of the Rohypnol. Slowly, agonizingly, her eyes cracked open. They were glassy, drifting blankly across the ceiling before they finally tracked downward and found my face. A sudden, beautiful spark of recognition penetrated the chemical haze. Her lips parted, but she lacked the physical strength to form a syllable. Instead, she managed a microscopic, desperate squeeze of my hand. I leaned forward, pressing my forehead gently against hers, letting my tears finally fall onto the sterile sheets. "I've got you, sweetheart," I whispered, my voice hardening into an absolute vow. "We are going home. Nobody is ever going to hurt you again." 1 month later, the bitter chill of the Chicago winter had completely surrendered to the lush, vibrant warmth of spring. The sprawling Sterling estate in North Shore now sat entirely empty, its windows dark, the massive iron gates padlocked by federal asset forfeiture agents. The spectacular downfall of the city's premier investment dynasty had dominated the financial news cycles for weeks, exposing the multi-million-dollar fraud to the harsh light of public scrutiny. Julian Sterling, stripped of his Brioni suits and his manipulative smiles, had officially pled guilty to grand embezzlement, wire fraud, and criminal conspiracy, facing a minimum of 25 years in a federal penitentiary without the option for early parole. His mother, Victoria, had fought the charges with a desperate, wild fury, but the high-definition video confessions and independent toxicology reports were absolutely insurmountable. She was currently serving a 15-year sentence for false imprisonment and attempted murder. The $12 million corporate shortfall was being liquidated through their seized properties. But Rachel's $10 million inheritance remained completely untouched, securely locked within an independent trust under her exclusive control. The wealth was safe, but more importantly, my daughter was free. I stood on the wide, sunlit back porch of my modest private estate, a steaming mug of black coffee cradled in my hands. The morning air was sweet, carrying the scent of blooming daffodils and fresh earth. Down on the manicured lawn, Rachel sat in a comfortable wicker chair, a light wool blanket draped across her lap. She held a cup of chamomile tea in both hands, taking slow, deliberate sips as she absorbed the gentle, healing warmth of the sun. The deep shadows beneath her eyes had finally faded, replaced by the natural, healthy color returning to her cheeks. The physical weakness from the poisoning was slowly leaving her body, replaced by a quiet, resilient strength. She looked up from her tea, sensing my presence on the porch, and offered a soft, brilliant smile. I smiled back, raising my mug in a silent Vungja salute. Looking out over the garden, I realized that a long lifetime spent studying the raw, hidden flaws within precious stones had taught me the ultimate truth about human structure. The Sterling family had built their entire empire on a crumbling bedrock of arrogance, deception, and greed. They believed their social standing and expensive lawyers made them completely untouchable, insulated from the consequences of their tanyan. They thought they could casually erase an innocent life to save their own skin. But they had fundamentally underestimated the unbreakable, terrifying power of a mother defending her only child. True authority doesn't need to roar, and it doesn't need to threaten. It observes, it calculates, and it waits with infinite patience until the foundation of a lie is fully exposed. I had simply gathered the raw materials of their own deception and constructed a perfect, inescapable trap. Now the monsters were locked inside their own steel cages, their name disgraced, and their legacy reduced to ash. The dark, suffocating storm had passed, leaving behind a beautiful, absolute peace. Blood makes you related, but loyalty and respect make you family. In the high-stakes world of wealth and ambition, the ultimate betrayals don't come from your enemies in the boardroom. They come from the wolves sharing your dinner table, wearing the masks of devoted spouses and pristine in-laws. They underestimate the quiet strength of those who have spent a lifetime building a legacy, mistaking patience for weakness, until the weight of their own greed pulls the entire structure down upon their heads. But what about you? Have you ever had to face a calculated betrayal from someone you trusted implicitly with your heart or your future? How far would you go to protect your blood when the foundations of your life are threatened by the people supposed to protect them? Let's connect in the comments below. I want to hear your stories of survival, justice, and resilience. If this story of absolute maternal justice and surgical retaliation resonated with you, show your support for the channel. Hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss our upcoming real-life dramas. Stay vigilant, watch your perimeter, and remember, the truth will always find the fracture.
Bài học cốt lõi là lời cảnh báo, đừng bao giờ nhầm lẫn sự nhẫn nại của tình mẫu tử là biểu hiện của sự yếu đuối, và đừng dại dột đánh giá thấp một bộ óc sắc bén ẩn sâu dưới vẻ ngoài điềm tĩnh. Gia tộc Sterling tự phụ rằng tiền tài, địa vị và quyền lực có thể che đậy mọi tội ác, nhưng họ đã lầm. Họ quên mất rằng một người mẹ tự thân lập nghiệp luôn sở hữu tư duy chiến lược bài bản và sự kiên định thép để nhìn thấu mọi rạn nứt của những lời dối trá. Sức mạnh thực sự không cần phải phô trương hay gầm rú để răn đe. Nó nằm ở sự quan sát thầm lặng, tính toán chuẩn xác và một lòng trung thành tuyệt đối với những giá trị gia đình chân chính. Đó chính là vũ khí tối thượng, đủ sức sắc bén để đập tan mọi pháo đài danh vọng dù kiên cố đến đâu, nếu nó chỉ được xây dựng trên nền tảng của sự tham lam và phản bội.